right, welcome back, everybody.
Sweet.
Good to have you with me, Javier.
Yeah, same to see you. Good. Already getting tongue twisted. Good to see you too, man.
Yeah, and this episode is kind of we've decided that we're going to start introducing a little bit more structure to the episodes in general, and I think the general loose structure that we've come up with is going to be really great because it builds on a pattern of taking an initial idea, expanding on it, and then idealizing it. And I think it's going to be a really great way for us to flesh out these ideas that we're looking at and provide a little bit of structure and give people a better understanding of what the episode might entail coming into it. So
Yeah.
This one spawns from, and in general, the source of the content for these podcasts comes from, we work with people on a day-to-day basis, how implementing private trust and private structures like that private irrevocable trust can benefit you legally and in commerce. And so we deal with the public quite a bit. And because there's so many misconceptions about what is possible, what is not possible, so many different alternating theories and approaches to this, we end up having to navigate a lot of belief systems and a lot of ideas that inevitably will come up. And the idea that we are contending with in this episode is the idea that doom and gloom is on the horizon, the apocalypse is looming, and we wanted to break down where most people are at, where we're at, and how we would approach this in an ideal world. So, Javier, to get us started, what is your kind of experience with the overall, like if you just walk up to anybody on the street who's maybe got a little bit of interest in financial matters, and what would you say would be the average take on this looming financial apocalypse that is seemingly coming our way?
Well, it seems interesting because the whole doom and gloom it's old, it's archaic. And what's interesting in our line of business is that from our client's perspective, or at least our perspective, we're seeing how people are making decisions based on these speculations. Now, there's probably validity to certain things ending and all of that stuff, sure. But where it starts to affect our reality is when we have to make decisions, and those being, legal decisions, financial decisions, and then us as, men and, heads of our family, we have to start to kind of speculate, is this, the right message? What are we, how are we supposed to approach this? So if I were to go up to anybody, and what was the question actually?
Just the
rephrase that.
Yeah, please. What is your perception of the average person's take on this looming apocalypse?
Okay, simple enough. I think that it's just overgeneralized because it's such an easy thing to give into. It's so easy to just be like, well, yeah, we've seen all the movies already, of course, and people kind of expect it. In a way, it's kind of fear because it makes us give in really easily to those types of feelings. And then they lead us into kind of non-action. And I think that's the thing that is not really talked about. It just came to me right now, is that it breeds some non-action. And for others, it's probably a good thing. It probably is a catalyst and making them respond positively. But others don't have the same hearts. Others might feel completely encapsulated by this, image in the air, and really are feeling like they're pulling into this hole that everybody else, or at least seemingly in the public, people are creating. So I would say, go back to basic principles. Look at basic chemistry. Look at how the sun operates. Look at how these, logical and reasonable things, to start looking at how you're going to deal with the things that you don't know. It's like we've had a garden before. We know what to do when weeds come out. We know when there's a harsh winter. Why aren't we reapplying these things? It's like we've never experienced this before, but yet we're experiencing this like amnesia sort of with this. I mean, we were talking the other day, right? And I mentioned like, well, yeah, we had the scare, and we're not that old, but I've vividly 2000, 2008, there's 2012, there's all these different crises and these ideas of things ending. And I just want to say from a financial and legal perspective, there is interest there for you to give into that. It has nothing to do with you personally. It's a business move, and people are going to react how they're going to react. And the markets know this. People in private corporations know this. People in Congress know this. Whether they know it completely aware, it doesn't matter. There are systems in place that are implemented to take advantage of that. It's really nothing personal, but it's one of these things that it's so easy to create and separate ourselves from, the world and say, well, it's falling apart, so who cares? Well, everything's going to hell. Why should I care about my savings or my finance? It's like, hey, that's the easy type of thinking they're trying to push everyone to go through. So you just stop caring. Hey, we took control of all of your rights, all your money, all your property. Hey, who cares? Let them have it. And that type of mentality is really the last thing standing between us and the rest of the things that we call, our estate and our rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. I think that for the most part, people have no real, the modern age has spawned this kind of amnesia, this short-term memory loss, where the news cycle and sensationalism, things pop up constantly, and you lose sight of the overall picture, which is the apocalypse is always on the horizon. I mean, you can look back, in theological circles, there's been predicting the literal apocalypse. Just about every year, there's been some sort of movement predicting the end of the world. And obviously, we're talking more about the looming financial collapse and the overhaul of our financial system. But even that, it ties into this psychological framework where there is a general insecurity found in life and in being in the world, and that can very easily be misconstrued into this insecurity with life in general.
Yeah, and just quickly, people lose their base, and they'll try to refine. I like that word you used. Insecurity, because they'll try to refine that or rebuild that foundation based on expert opinion, based on private corporations that really don't have the same interest that you think they do.
Right. The thing that they have going for them is they have ad campaigns and massive propaganda campaigns, you could say, where they have made sure to produce an image of security and like they have it together and they've got a plan, and they've very successfully subconsciously kind of imprinted themselves as the bastion of hope and security in the world. So people knee jerk when they feel that general insecurity looming, they look towards these institutions rather than what they can do themselves. And it's just an unfortunate fact of life, but there's all sorts of industries that have popped up around this insecurity, you could say, all of the Patriot food supply, and there's nothing wrong with being prepared and having something as a backup plan. But overwhelmingly, I mean, you look at the people 20 years ago at Y2K, they probably bought a lot of food rations then, and it's been 20 years now. How many of those people actually ate those food rations? If you're going to buy a year's worth of food that is good for 30 years, like, what if something in the next 30 years doesn't happen and you don't eat that food? It's a huge investment of that resources that could have been used towards purchasing some land or doing things in your actual day-to-day life, buying some gold, any type of investment that could grow that money, rather than put it in a bucket in your garage and let it be a physical totem of your fear and anxiety about the world.
A lot of people don't have a proper they're not prepared for business, and I think that it's a simple thing to be like, you should be prepared to go into business, go into the real world, and to get into the finance, that you anticipate for things not to work, because the real world, things never just work. There's all these errors. But I think that there is this dreamlike state that people get put into when they're in this technology, that they get suggestions, they get persuaded into thinking that whatever's in their mind is going to work out perfectly. But that's never the case. Those are people that haven't had experience in business. Sure, you can have an expectation, but in order to learn how to not completely dissolve yourself and others' resources, we have to know what we're doing beforehand. And one of the things that I was, because I'm thinking when you said about, taking resources that you don't, it immediately reminded me of loans. Because if people provide cheap loans, just because you have an idea doesn't mean it's going to work. But if there's enough institutions and places, well, they'll convince you that you are a genius and that you are capable of doing these things. You don't even have to think about it. That business is super easy. Everything works out. You're the fool. But you've been supplied capital and now you think you're in business. And, 5-10 years later, you have this multi-million-dollar revenue with $20,000 salary because you didn't think things through. Your marriage is failing, things are, all of these things can happen, and they do happen every single day. But, there is this introduction of technology that persuades our mind away from the principles of reality, which is like we plant things, hey, things grow on it. Insects see the fruit, they like the sugar. So we have to act appropriately. Why are we acting like when we build something that there aren't going to be things that are going to dissolve it? It's preposterous to think that.
Yes. And I think by and large, when we're talking about something as complex and massive as the financial system, it's important to consider the fact that this thing has momentum behind it, and nature has provided a type of form, a pattern that takes care of the needs of the financial market. And it is, despite the idea and the thinking that everything is so volatile and things fall apart so easily, in my opinion, it's kind of the opposite. That wherever there is a need, there is a pattern that will quickly emerge to fill that hole. And the idea that there's somebody at the top that has the power and the means to completely destroy this system and quickly usher in a new one, that is a very high stakes game. Let's imagine that there is somebody who does have that kind of power. If you do have that kind of power, it has taken hundreds of years to acquire it, right? If you do something crazy, something rash that drastically and quickly changes the nature of the monetary system, you're actually putting all of that control at risk. What is necessary is a slow grind and transformation, introducing the concepts, slowly planting those seeds. And I think that unwittingly, what a lot of these truther, social media personalities are doing is they are doing the heavy lifting of introducing this concept to the people. Where otherwise they wouldn't be exposed to it at all. And they don't see that they're doing that, but they are the ones really infusing this energy that things are about to collapse, to expect a collapse, to expect a social credit system and all of these things. How you actually get to that point is a much more complex and nuanced and subtle process than what they're portraying, but they don't see that they're contributing to it with their approach.
It's easier to kick the can down the road and say the problem is coming. It's not right here, but like here it is. Look, it's in your face, but it's not happening right now. But keep it in your mind. It's not going to happen. You don't need it right now, but you keep it in there.
Right.
It's like, what use is that? Like, what is that building a character? Is that giving you life? There's certain catalysts that are useful. Most of them that are, that portion your ability to see the options in front of you that make it acute are never good. You should never ever be in a position where especially with finance and legal decisions, unless you're in a fight that you have to make a split decision, there's no reason that you should have to do that. But every time I feel like I'm talking with a lot of clients and there's this battle that they're going through with their finances, on top of not just understanding, their estate and the ability to get credit, leverage the public and the private, but their own security about what their expectations are with their own business. And it's something that is not going to get, it's not going to get fixed, but there's going to be adaptability. Just like you said, there's a voice, there's changes. there's going to be places where there's light, and there's places where there's shadows. And where there are shadows, the right people will assemble and produce a new idea that is probably much better than one that can be delegated to somebody else because they were appointed a seat to it, rather than they were legitimately called by the situation, by God, by that day.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's a good sequitur into, the next phase of this evolving idea. We've covered what the screeching birds and the pundits essentially are saying about this collapse of the financial system. Now, what would your particular, if somebody came to you and they said, hey, Javier, I'm really worried about the financial collapse coming. I have my little business and I just, I have like maybe $5,000 to play with. And, other than that, I have my day to day, I take care of this. I just don't know what to do. I'm considering buying a bunch of freeze dried food. What's your advice to that person, and how to navigate like the next 10 years, let's say?
I've found I found that a lot of questions are answered with another question, which is, what's important to you? What's your priorities? Because then I know how to guide that. Or else it doesn't matter what I say. If you don't agree with the level of priority of what needs to be handled first, it's just not going to happen, And I would never tell somebody, oh, on Tuesday at 3:30, the world's going to end. Prepare for that day. I'm the type of person that already lives like it's his very last day. But the other thing is that the other variable that's not talked about so much is our consideration to the people around us. It's like, yeah, you might not care about your salary, you might not want a salary, but what about your kids? What about your family? What are you going to leave them? If you're going to go kill yourself or go into this hole for 6 years, what about the people you've made? Is there no responsibility there? Then we start to kind of get to the bottom of what money means to people. Then we can accordingly, organize something that is mutual rather than some cold hard, like you have to do this, or if not, you're not in my good grace. Mm-hmm. So, there is a lot, weighing on people right now because of this. Right now, the biggest question is like, well, $50 of this, everything's. But as a trustee, and I said this in the last podcast, the money changes. And not even as a trustee. Let's say this, because we're identifying as civilians and people in commerce. Money doesn't exist in the house of God, or nor in my house. It's just a thing that we use to exchange. So it could be anything within my household, but people are freaking out because of the de-dollarization, all the things that it implies. But it's like, your front lawn isn't even cut. It's like, why are you worried about the Federal Reserve? Yeah. You deal with the thing in front of you. That's my greatest advice. Yeah. It's like, what's your main priority? Deal with the thing in front of you, because I always see that they're very passionate about their problems. They're very passionate about identity. Look, this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. But they don't actually tackle one thing at a time and organize it. And I find it really strange that people have to be very kindly reminded that they need to put these problems in order so that they can know for themselves too, like, okay, this is taken care of, this is taken care of, this is taken care of. Because how many things can we hold in the mind at the same time? 3, 4 max without distraction? I don't know. But I know for a fact that if people have this passionate feeling about their finances and they haven't taken the time to organize those things one at a time by priority, I'm thinking you're an advanced person or something. You're trying to skip steps, and we can't do that. Everything comes back to basics so that we can have a proper perspective on the future. Otherwise, what we have now, if that's not put under a microscope and scrutinized for yourself, it's going to breed bad fruit, bad money, bad relationships in the future, because that's Money's so much more than that. It's not just a thing, a conduit. It's all the stuff that it's connected to. And that's one of the things that, people should really recognize is their own relationship with money before they encounter, well, look at the things. They're trying to think about the things that are in relation to money, except their own relationship with that, how they earn it, how they're at peace with, how do they perceive it, because ultimately everyone's different. It'll be up to them specifically what they want. Some people are going to be like, hey, I just want to devote my life to this church and that's it. Hey, I want to devote my life to my wife and my children. That's it. And it's simple and clear. But most people don't even get around to thinking about the things that they have, the bank account, and how those things are going to be administered after they're gone, because it kind of shows us that we believe that the things that we have, we will have forever.
Yeah, so I guess the synopsis or the general overview of that would just be to, first of all, take stock of everything at your disposal, all the things that you are engaged in, prioritize clearly what you're trying to accomplish and what matters the most to you, and then be very pragmatic and practical about the things that you choose to spend your time and energy on. And I would agree with all of that. And I think just to add to it, we mentioned before that there is a sort of fundamental insecurity that most people are dealing with. And where we come in is we provide people a level of knowledge that can overcome a certain level of insecurity in the world. Obviously, having all of your assets protected, having your tax profile as streamlined as possible, having assets completely sheltered from being able to be seized or having wages garnished, anything like that, is obviously one way to put a certain amount of ease into your life and peace of mind. But you could have all of that stuff perfectly dialed in, 100% secure, and still be absolutely terrified of death. And if you're not facing that fundamental insecurity, which I kind of argue the only insecurity is the fear of death. And once you overcome that, the rest of it's all kind of details, So there's the very pragmatic and practical side, dealing with your worldly affairs in your estate. But then it's a matter of, are you afraid of death? And if you answer yes to that question, that needs to be your main focus, because it doesn't matter how much externally you take care of and you put on a brave face and you buy all the weapons and you buy all of the food and have the off-grid infrastructure or whatever. If you're afraid of death, you're going to squander those resources. As soon as the chips are down, you're going to make rash decisions and you're going to hurt the people around you. And so my addition to that, being pragmatic and addressing things and taking full stock, is to know thyself, really inquire within. If you have that fundamental insecurity with death, recognize that you don't have to have that. A lot of people will pontificate that people who aren't afraid of death are lying to themselves, but I'm a walking testament to the fact that that's not true. From the outside looking in, it's all just perspective, but I can say with certainty that I'm not afraid of death, that I've overcome that, and I'm aware of the fact that there are bigger things happening in the world than just my own little personal story. And so by overcoming that, ironically, that is what allowed me to take the steps towards this trustee movement and take this bold action and stop asking for permission and really pursue things that I was passionate about, that don't fit neatly within the scope of what everyone else is doing. And that has been my greatest asset moving forward.
Yeah. It's sobering. I've heard it many times said before that one should make death their ally, because it is the most sobering thing, or at least it should be. In that, and I've used this example before, but many years ago. And I'm sure everyone's experienced this, which is, you're just driving down the road, and then, a little squirrel passes by, or you're dozing off on the road and, you do one of these, you kind of swerve and oh my gosh. And then for a split second, are 100%, staring at death. And then, and just watch ourselves when this happens. because the next 30 seconds is the real you. The next 30 seconds, you're going to be like, oh, well, it looks like, even if you're drunk, you're on drugs, you'll sober up. You'll be like, oh, I probably should maintain proper behavior and all of this stuff. But if people don't have a catalyst, they don't prioritize what's going on in their life, you're either going to go through death blind, or you're going to go through it, completely aware. And those are really two different types of people that operate in the world. And, one last thing that I wanted to mention was that if we don't create a habit of measuring things with our heart and death, we lose perspective on things very quickly. And we start to create other things to be the foundation, like we mentioned before. And you mentioned something about building a foundation. And I actually heard this yesterday, which was you can't add on to a building that has a foundation for 2 stories, kind of a contractor's thing. Because if we're not prepared to think soberly and attack and put the things in the right places in the very beginning, it's going to be nearly impossible to get to where we want to go, because we don't know how much energy, we don't know how much money, we don't know how much of everything takes to get there. So we have to be able to have a grounded perspective on these things as we go. People think that, everything is like people say, and it's just not true. Reality is just so much more difficult. If you built a house before, you'll know that it isn't just what the contractor estimates it to be. There's all these little things break. That's what's expected. And once we have this, reasoning as an exercise in our muscle, once we approach things like finance and, legal matters, it becomes a process of elimination. And then you're like, hey, this isn't difficult at all. But it becomes difficult if we're not anchored to the ground, if we're floating on and bearing our opinions and beliefs on fear, on things that are unknown. And guess what, man, this is what's crazy. And what bothers me is that people are okay not knowing. People are okay going into things they don't understand. I found a quote that I wrote last year. And you know how Facebook does a reminder thing. And it said, do not invest in what you don't understand. Invest in understanding. It was very simple when I thought about it, because so many people go into things without actually measuring for themselves their own expectation. They take other people's word for it. And then they hold this concept in their brain and they're let down by the world. And they're like, I thought the world worked this way. And I thought I could trust people. It's like, these things have to be dealt with early on. A lot of us didn't have the right fathers. A lot of us come from broken homes, and we weren't taught the structure of how things should actually be dealt with in our mind, in our house, in our body, and so on and so forth. Just because technology has advanced and all of these new factors and considerations come into existence doesn't mean that those things don't apply. There's universal law that's growing parallel to technology. And there are rights and there are wrongs. And your heart is feeling these things out as we make these decisions. And I fear for my life. And I'm a God-fearing man. And because of that, I tend to be more practical. I tend to give better advice. I tend to become, let's say, definitely not the word paranoid, but, and Joe Rogan said this before, it's just you take longer to make decisions, not because you're hesitant, but because you genuinely have more responsibilities and considerations to do. So every time you think, you're having thoughts about thinking about creating a business or something like that, don't measure yourself with anybody else. You have your own set of concerns. No one knows what's going on in your marriage. No one knows what's going on in your household. People aren't dealing with the same things. So we have to stop basing our decisions and our concepts and our perception based on things that are really just instruments that interpret and supplement reality, but we're taking them as truth, and it's affecting our ability to make decisions and the rights that each person in this country has as citizens.
Yes, and